So we're going to have our keynote speaker today from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Shakib is the Vice President and Chief Digital and Information Officer at CHOP. And he's been a great partner for us as we've been working with the CBTN and looking at the research side and really integrating and coming up with a single solution to really bring clinical and research together. And, I have to give a shout out to Ash and the AWS team who have been with us for years now. And I think without that partnership and again, really working through a multidisciplinary group to figure it out. And now right on the heels of ARPA-H, I think we can really integrate it and then hopefully spread it to all the other CBTN institutions. So with that, Shakib, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jay. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. Clearly, my times were a little off. It's the DC traffic, I'm told, on the way up here. So thank you for having me, Jay. Thanks for the intro. It's interesting. I had a whole talk planned, and I think I'm going to pivot a little bit in terms of because I had an opportunity to speak to so many people last night and get a sense of what the struggles are, what the challenges are. Can you hear me okay? Okay. And pain points that folks are talking about. And I heard a few things. Before I get started on that, a little bit about my background. I spent about 15 years in banking, financial services, derivatives, quantitative modeling. It's about as exciting as it sounds. And then I switched to healthcare technology about 14 years ago. And so I was at Northwestern for 10. Spent a lot of time working on quality metrics, value-based care, MSSP, ACO organizations, building data warehouses and analytics. And then came to CHOP as the Chief Data Analytics Officer 5 years ago, 6 months before the pandemic. Great timing. We relocated to Philadelphia from Chicago and then moved into my Chief Digital Information Officer role 3 years ago. So in that role, I oversee all of our enterprise technology, infrastructure, analytics, AI, all of our clinical and business applications, and cybersecurity. So there's not much room for sleep in that type of role, but it's fun, it's exciting, and CHOP's been on a very large digital transformation journey. So I'm going to start by telling a story from my Northwestern days. So Northwestern, as you may know, Northwestern Memorial Healthcare, Northwestern Medicine, is the hospital system. And then there is also the Feinberg School of Medicine, that is, the research academic arm of Northwestern Medicine. And my work when I transitioned to Northwestern Memorial Healthcare was to lead data and analytics. And in order to do that, they asked me to lead the redesign and reimagining of the enterprise data warehouse, which at the time was the second largest data warehouse in healthcare. It was Northwestern and Intermountain. I was like, great, sign me up. Never done that in healthcare, but sounds great. Happy to do it. They're like, well, in order for you to do that, we need you to switch employers. I was like, well, tell me more about that. Like, well, the enterprise data warehouse sits in the Feinberg School of Medicine and is only used by research. I said, oh, interesting. So I actually shifted employers from Northwest. I'm describing this because I heard some of the pain last night in terms of data accessibility, integration between the enterprise, clinical, operational, research, and the idea of my talk is how do we bring all that together? And that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years. And so I switched employers from Northwestern Memorial Healthcare to the Feinberg School of Medicine. And I was told by the CEO of Northwestern Medicine that your job when you're done is to bring the enterprise data warehouse to the hospital. So, okay, I'm sure the dean will love that. So it was an interesting 3 years in which we implemented. At the time that I joined Northwestern, we had 10 electronic medical records, 2 Cerners, 2 Epics, 7 Meditechs, and then maybe a few eClinical Works. And the idea was that all that data fed into the enterprise data warehouse and was used by the entire research enterprise. I mean, Northwestern did an absolute fantastic job opening up access of clinical, operational, financial data to the researchers that needed it at the time they needed it. So that's where I cut my teeth. Actually, the background that I come from is research has access to all the data they need at any given time. And the idea was the opposite of, I think, where most people are struggling, which is the hospital side of the house and clinical run the enterprise data warehouse, and research usually gets a trickle. And as and so I did that for 3 years, redesigned the enterprise data warehouse. We went to one Epic, sunset all the EMRs. I think we had we had about 250 source systems feeding into the EDW. When we completed that, we had 1,000 analytics reports, and it was used by Northwestern Medicine. And when I transitioned, I was able to transition the EDW to the hospital system, but still remain accessible to all of the researchers that needed it. And I think that really is the model that we need in healthcare. I think there's quite a bit of discussion, obviously, on precision medicine. I mean, that is the idea, it's the biggest idea. But when I think about that, I just drop precision. It's just medicine. And medicine requires research, clinical care, and education. And that's the mission at CHOP. Those are the tripartite aspects of our mission. So I don't really see a difference. And I think coming from outside of healthcare, I've been able to observe so many silos that are inhibiting innovation, that are inhibiting bench to bedside, that are inhibiting a number of things that we need to do. The idea is really, how do we come work together? And when I came to CHOP 5 years ago as the Chief Analytics Officer, I presented what we had at the EDW at Northwestern to our CEO, Madeline Bell. And her exact words were, "This is what I want at CHOP. This is how it needs to work." So great. So over the last 5 years, we've been on this journey of trying to bring together all of our, started with data assets, but now it's really all about all of our digital assets, everything. How do we bring all that together? How do we all manage it for the 3 parts of our mission? And so what I'll walk you through, so hopefully that resonates in terms of, there's access, we need data, we need it at speed, we need it to be accessible, and we need it to get to the people that need it, and get into clinical practice as quickly as possible to drive innovation. And so we refer to that at CHOP as driving breakthroughs. That's what we're here to do. And so what we've been working on, what I'll walk you through is our data and analytics strategy, show you some of the things that we've built. But I think it's not important what we've built. It's important about what the mindset has been to drive that. And we need to continue that mindset. And partners like Adam and Jay and others on my team who are here, Jay Jenkins, Sheree Pardue, who runs the applications for us, all need to have that mindset of, we're here to work together towards a common mission. What is the fastest way to do that? And how do we need to set up the digital architecture to enable that type of work? So hopefully that resonates. I want to talk a little bit about, we call the group here Digital and Technology Services. And so what you see here is our new enterprise strategy. We refreshed the strategic plan. This is for all of CHOP, our enterprise strategy about 6 months or so ago. And you'll see that we have what you'd expect, kind of our foundational imperatives: lead, quality, and safety. Develop a next generation operating model that leverages AI, automation, advanced analytics to drive operational efficiency and improvement. And then, of course, world-driven research, world-leading research-driven precision medicine. We have an incredible focus on home and community-based care at scale. Workforce of the future. I mean, fundamentally, we need to retrain all of the people at our organizations on digital literacy. And we've done a lot of work. We have I'll cover a data and analytics university at CHOP. And then the last is developing new business models, which I think part of it is, how do you develop strategic partnerships like the ARPA-H to drive some of your goals for the organization forward by leveraging that work? And what's interesting about this strategy, and I'm on the Enterprise Strategy Committee, and I felt very strongly about having digital somewhere, which I didn't win, but I created my own version of this which doesn't look great on this slide for some reason. It doesn't look like that on my slides. But essentially, the idea is that DTS is critical to driving innovation, enabling every aspect of our new enterprise strategy. So actually, in this bubble, we said it's all digital and technology services that is enabling all of this work, right? And so I think that's just the mindset that how do you set up your digital and technology infrastructure to enable everything that your organization wants to accomplish. And so in terms of moving into our data analytics strategy, you'll see our vision there, which is we want to be a data-driven organization. One where data is accessible, trusted, strategic asset, and where a culture of data-driven decision-making is ingrained in our DNA. When I came to CHOP, Madeline had being a data-driven organization as the number 2 priority on her vision board. I still have yet to see another healthcare CEO that has being data-driven on their vision board at all. And so part of that is having that mindset at the enterprise level really helps because it makes it very easy to get the work, the investments that you need to move things forward. I just wanted to have show you a couple examples of how we use. I mean, we use it in every facet. We use data analytics in every facet of our operations. In terms of this is a specialty care dashboard showing new patient visits, scheduling trends, et cetera. We have the care network, which is we have around 150 sites, specialty care, urgent care, primary care. All of those sites are using data to make data-driven decisions in terms of utilization of our specialty care sites, operations tools, primary care self-service tools. We've spent the last 5 years essentially developing these with the operational leaders in those spaces, partnering with them, training their teams to fetch all this data from a self-service perspective. Digital health, we have a program in terms of remote patient management. We measure every aspect of that program in terms of what is the impact on quality and safety outcomes, operational throughput, patient outcomes. This just shows one very interesting statistic is our what we call the NICU Catch program is a remote patient management program that's driving 45% reduction in readmissions by getting patients home more quickly and then equipping them with digital tools to enable their care. And then, of course, safety and quality, whether it's the employee safety dashboard, compliance, et cetera. And then harm prevention. We track all of these metrics, report them to the board, to the CEO council, et cetera. I want to share some of those examples. And then the last couple of years are really focused on revenue cycle analytics. How do we do this on the operational side as well? But it's all powered by the same data warehouse, the same analytics tools, the same standards, best practices, et cetera. And so I want to move to covering the 6 pillars of our data analytics strategy at CHOP. So the first one is really creating a centralized enterprise data hub that has all of your data assets. You can think about this as a data warehouse, lake house, data lake. Think about that in any capacity, but ours is one that combines those concepts, our relational data, as well as our unstructured data is either within AWS or Snowflake running on AWS. And then unified data. And this is a critical component of it is how are we taking all the disparate sources of data, integrating it, normalizing it, deduplicating it, modeling it to make sure it is consistent and available across all of the use cases. The third piece, which I think is a major differentiator for our strategy, is trusted data. We have a huge focus on making sure that data is a trusted asset. That is, we have a data trust office, data governance, data quality, data stewardship. I'll talk a little bit about that. And so what you're seeing on this side of the diagram is the enablers, the infrastructure enablers for making data usable. And what you're seeing on this side is then we say, well, how do we make sure we have a workforce that's actually trained to be able to use the data? And so we have a very large data literacy program, which I'll talk about. We have self-service, large focus on self-service, and then a very large focus on AI and advanced analytics. So we started focusing on that in that space in the last couple of years. And I'll talk about that portfolio of work as well in terms of predictive models and AI-based assistance that we're developing at CHOP. A couple of quick statistics. Our data platform today, 110 data sources, Epic, Workday, and about 108 applications. We have over 100 terabytes of data in the data lake. It's doubled in the last 18 months. We have over 300 users of the data warehouse directly. We have thousands of users in terms of analytics and reporting, but these are the ones that are querying the data warehouse directly. And then we have over 4,000 users of our analytics products. So moving to the next part of this, which is, I think, hopefully you find this really interesting, is we have spent the last couple of years working with our research institute and my teams to develop what I refer to as the front door to all data at CHOP. And so we have this single front door. We use a product called Elation. And we were, I believe, their first healthcare customer. We internally branded it as Gene because you'll see this theme in my talk. Data and analytics is DNA. The data warehouse is called Helix. This is called Gene. It's the right crowd. Yeah, exactly. So we used to have the enterprise data governance platform called Edge, in which all the data assets were, and our research institute was starting to develop another data catalog. And we said, the folks that are doing research and the folks that are taking care of our patients are essentially the same people wearing two different hats on a particular day. So how do we make sure, why would we have two data catalogs? Why wouldn't we have all of our data assets in one data catalog accessible to the entire enterprise? And this concept of digital doors is the concept of a data front door. Yeah, right, exactly. And many types of data and related research. All of our research and operational data assets, our data dictionaries, our metric definitions, our dashboards, report libraries, everything is available through Gene, regardless of its research, clinical quality, operations, financial. And this is what we've seen. We've seen a 647% increase in the use of data and accessing data through the data catalog since June. I mean, that is incredible. We couldn't have imagined that we would have this much. And so it just shows you, I think, how large the appetite is for data. And this is one way to make accessibility to data much easier for everybody in the institution. This is Gene. And so you just see kind of like the front door when you come. You see this is the search functionality. Based on what you have access to, you can look at Arcus, which is our research data platform. ClickSense is our visualization tool. Metrics Glossary, cohorts, all cohorts, research and non-research, are all defined, all the data sources. You can search this. This is going to be AI-enabled search as well, so it'll pick up what you need and help you find it as quickly as possible. The other component of this is the trusted data layer. So we have this process, essentially, that anything that goes into our clinical data warehouse or our CHOP data warehouse has to be trusted. It has to have a data steward. That data steward has to define the metric, verify and sign off on the metric. There's governance processes that enable all of that. That it's transparent and it's federated. And once all of those steps are completed, then and only then do we start using the data for operational purposes. Now, I will say that if all of this isn't completed, we realize that there's a data science use case. You are trying to formulate a hypothesis, but you just need to explore. So we have a data lake in which none of these rules apply. You have to be a sophisticated data scientist and prove that to us to some degree of training and certification, but then you get access to that environment, and we allow you to just run and explore the data to form your question. And once you've formulated that, and you're ready to move into more enterprise-grade data and analytics, where you have to have a little bit more trust, we move you into the data warehouse platform and the tools that we have. And this is a little bit about also agility. And I'm a very big fan of agile governance. I think governance is important, but I feel that a lot of times it can be applied in a non-nuanced way and limit our ability to move things forward as quickly as we'd like. And so we make that distinction. And then data trust and practice, which you see here directly in Gene. We have 360 metrics. This is the metrics glossary. Every single metric has a standard definition, description, calculation, all of that's in here. If you want to make changes to the data definition, you have to go through the governance this committee. So we don't want 7 different definitions of length of stay, but we do realize there's a couple different ways to calculate that. One for finance, one for clinical. And so we realize that, but we manage it very, very closely. This is a bit more in terms of a screenshot of data clause in Gene. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of how to set. I think this is a critical component of accelerating access to data and making sure it's trusted across the enterprise. When I arrived at CHOP, 5 years ago, one of the things I assessed the current state of data analytics, and the feedback that I got, and this is a quote, is the first 15 minutes of every meeting are spent discussing where people got their data. How do you define it? How do we define it? And those conversations rarely ever happen any longer because of these tools. And then in terms of data literacy, so, I think this is a large opportunity across health systems in general, is how much are we investing in spending time in teaching people how to work with data? And so part of this is we have broad offerings, micro sessions, communities of practice, a very lengthy 8-week course for professionals who need to be be expert level in data analytics. And so you'll see the various levels: clinical analytics champions, clinical data fellows, clinical data professionals, with varying levels of training timeline to be able to get trained on data and analytics. We've trained, I think, over 4,000 people at this point over the last couple of years in terms of data and analytics. And then these folks have access to the data and are able to do their jobs much more effectively and efficiently. So this has been a game changer for us in terms of really training people. And the coursework here goes from everything to what is CHOP's data ecosystem, how do you access data at CHOP, how do you analyze data, how do you storytell with data, how do you effectively make decisions with data. And so an interesting journey for us. And then the fifth pillar is really just self-service. So we've really focused on Slicer Dicer, which is an Epic tool in Epic, to make sure that folks have access to that data. And what you'll see here is we've released 39 Slicer Dicer data models, 200% increase, in terms of minutes of use. Lots of folks directly embedding that data. And part of this is we want clinicians to be able to effectively analyze their own populations without asking a data analyst for data. And so this allows them to be able to do the exploratory analytics at the time they need it without having to submit a data request. And it also allows us to direct our bandwidth elsewhere in terms of doing our work. And the last is advanced analytics and AI. So in terms of advanced analytics and AI, we are focused both on operational and clinical data science. I mentioned earlier, research and clinical and operations. We've done some work in terms of risk stratification of patients at risk for collapsy. We took that data to U.S. News, and that helped us in many ways in terms of how they think about their U.S. News ranking and analysis to drive that forward. We have been working on a model to forecast inpatient census to really drive volume-based staffing to the extent that we can, and also staffing the volumes for our ambulatory providers. And then we have some Gen AI use cases. We have something we call CHOP GPT, which is our version of Chat GPT. It's got a nice ring to it. And CHOP Policy AI Assistant. So one of the things I'll talk about in terms of our view on generative AI, or AI in general, is that AI has to be an ally and help us do the work we do better. So our tagline for that is work smarter, care better. It's here to help us. And how do we remove the administrative burdens and make life a little easier? We also have the concept of human in the loop in all AI-based decisions or recommendations, and that must be validated by a human being. And so our focus is really on developing AI assistants in various facets to help folks. This is a look into our AI project portfolio. So I'll start on the my left, deploying some things that we're deploying right now. It's a predictive model and again, you'll see a mix of use cases here that are being driven by the Research Institute, but enabled by my team with infrastructure and other tools but they're really being led by the researchers. We give them brain to be able to do their work under, using the enterprise infrastructure tools, et cetera, and we give them autonomy to be able to do what they need to do under our enterprise tools. So predictive model for hyperfibrosis. I mentioned ChopGPT. It's in beta pilot right now. This is our own version of ChatGPT. We plan on training it on our own materials, proprietary information, et cetera, enabling the workforce with it. So we have senior leaders using that now. We have something called My Chop Draft Response. So we worked with Epic, and we're the first organization to scale this across all of our clinicians. What this does is it creates auto draft responses to patient messages in MyChart. And we get over 1 million messages, which can be a quick response by a physician, very complex. It could be a visit, frankly. And some organizations have started charging just to respond to the messages, you might know, because it takes so much time. So this auto drafts response, I'll share some stats on how that's been helpful. Census forecasting for financial planning, in my mind, in terms of this. The lowest common denominator is if you can predict census, then you could potentially predict staffing. And if you could predict census, you could predict supplies, et cetera. I think that's the future of healthcare from an operational standpoint, is prediction using AI, machine learning, to recognize patterns and adjust. When I was at Northwestern, we used to predict census. And the way the variability in census comes from essentially 3 places: your add-on cases in the OR, your unpredictable ED, and your transport patients. And for the ED, when we were looking at explanatory variables for the ED census, the thing that was the highest predictor of ED census and extremely accurate was, were the Bears playing? And was there a concert? Or Lollapalooza was always the spike in Chicago, right? So part of this is, how do we do that same thing in pediatrics? Children's schedules are a little bit harder to predict kind of where they're going to be. But in COVID, we actually built a model to predict census, which was plus minus 5% margin of error, which from the studies that I read was the most accurate. And we used what we found when we were doing that analysis is the best predictors for patients with COVID that would arrive at CHOP were humidity and social proximity. And to measure social proximity, we looked at publicly available Google mobility data to figure out how closely how much people were, getting together, and how close they were in proximity. And so that was very interesting. And then we're also building predictive models for claims denials. If we can predict claims that are likely to be denied before they get out the door, we can address those issues, increase reimbursement for the hospital. So we're working on that as well. And then things that we have in development, predictive model for deterioration in the CICU. We're working on a pilot for ambient listening for documentation. This is a huge opportunity in terms of just being able to apply AI to help with documentation of notes for both nurses and physicians. Hope Alpha is something one of our researchers is working on in terms of training a model and a large language model on all of our historical notes. So that's a very interesting concept and something that we're helping him enable. CHOP Policy AI Assistant. So many of you may deal with policies and procedures in your health system. We have 1,200 of them in a tool called Policy Manager. And so the idea is, do you really need to search Policy Manager or in 1,200 policies when you're trying to figure out how you might do something, what a policy is? Can we train an LLM on all those policies and procedures and make it available to you via just a quick chatbot? And so we've built that and starting to pilot that out. Some more work on claims. And then I just want to call out a couple here in terms of clinical pathways AI assistants. So CHOP has about 200 clinical pathways that our chief medical officer and clinical teams have built. It's kind of standard of care for various diseases. And so can we train an AI assistant on those clinical pathways and make them available to our clinicians directly in Epic through clinical decision support? Gen AI for coding and documentation, that's going to come next in terms of when you are documenting as a clinician, can we, in your workflow in real time, tell you if that's the right code and the best code to use for reimbursement, diagnosis code, procedure code, et cetera, and give you real-time support there. And so that's what we're working on next. Some examples of impact, which I think are really interesting, the chat draft responses that I mentioned, they are saving on average 42 seconds per response. And I mentioned we get millions of messages for each clinician. For ambient intelligence, we did a pilot with Dax Express. We're going to continue to do that work, but it was very well received by our clinicians. The last piece is one of our clinicians developed a model for detecting the wrong blood in tube, which has been absolutely amazing in terms of being able to reduce errors, in that space. This is just some recognition we received. I want to just move to a little bit about the cloud and technology modernization, kind of where we're headed next. So in terms of technology modernization, we have a few imperatives, but really it's stabilizing our technology operations, launching our cloud transformation, strengthening our core, maximizing the value that our team can bring to the enterprise, and then revolutionizing, creating the best digital technology experiences. And so we're working right now on our cloud strategy, as our friends at AWS are very well aware of. And our vision is to develop strategic partnerships with big tech and utilize a multi-cloud strategy to drive innovation, resiliency, security, and increase efficiency. And I think one of the things that we are very excited about is that we're approaching this in a way that we're bringing all the stakeholders to the table. Research, clinical, operations, foundation, and we've started building what we're calling a technology placemat, which is what are all of our technology needs across core clinical, core business, innovative research, digital transformation, and bringing that to our partners and saying, how can you enable us to do this work simultaneously? We want all of our data in the same place. We want it to speak to the various forms of data together in an integrated, seamless way, and we want to be able to have people access it in a seamless way. What is the architecture to enable that, along with prediction, AI, et cetera? And so we have just started pulling this together. We have a work group with Adam, with others, myself, to bring all of these ideas together and then bring them to our cloud providers and say, let's talk about where the matches are and how you can help us further our goals. And I think that's the approach also with the ARPA-H work, right, is that this will enable all of that in real time. So just a couple of thoughts I wanted to leave you with in terms of keys to success. One of my mentors has always told me health IT is 80% people, 10% process, and 10% technology. And so one of the things that we've done, which I did not show the slide up for, but Shri has been my partner in crime in this, for our project governance model that we redesigned over the last 2 years, we used to receive around 350 project submissions for my team on an annual basis. And we used to approve, 100 plus of them or so. Last year, we created 9 sub-planning committees and created a digital technology planning committee that's chaired by myself, the CMO, the CNO, and one of our COOs. And we all make the decisions together on where to prioritize our efforts. I think that's really the key, is bringing everybody together again, which is my next point, is have an enterprise-wide strategy, enterprise buy-in, and very strategic partnerships that lift all boats because we're better together. So how do we get everybody together to think about what their priorities are? And that's what we've really focused on. I think has been key to our success, to prioritize that work together. And it is not an IT decision. It is a clinical, operational, research decision. We're happy to work on what folks need us to work on, but we just need prioritization. And so that process has worked extremely, extremely well over the last year or so. Centralization versus autonomy. I think this is where a lot of the tension takes place. And what I like to say is that we're going to centralize the tools, best practices, and standards, but we're going to federate orchestration and expertise. Right, is that we cannot centralize doing all the work if you want to drive digital transformation, the use of AI, advanced analytics, research, education at scale, if we're going to say we're the gatekeepers of all of those things. We have to train others. We have to open it up, and that is our strategy. Data is key. Developing a robust, centralized data hub, enabling access to all those who need it securely. You saw that with Gene and our data warehouse. And then governance. I mentioned this earlier, but practicing agile governance. Govern what's needed and leave the rest. And we cannot do this by boiling the ocean, and we cannot do this by being too restrictive, but we do have to have some governance in place to make sure we're focusing on the right things at the right time. And the last piece is measuring outcomes of everything that we do. So we are kind of obsessive about this. We measure the financial stewardship that our work creates. We measure the quality improvement and outcome improvement and our patient experience improvement that our work creates. And so that has been the key to us receiving the funding and the support that we need to drive this work forward. So I think, in closing, probably, I don't know if I'm over time, but close to. I think in closing, I just want to leave you with the work that you all are doing is amazing and inspiring, and I'm so honored and humbled to be here. I moved into healthcare for the mission of helping patients. I was in finance, and that really wasn't cutting it for me. And then I moved into pediatrics, which has just been such a rewarding thing. So I think one of the takeaways, if I leave you with anything, is, it is the responsibility of the digital leaders in your organization to approach this work with a bit of humility and say, like people in my position, in Shree's position, and say, we're here to enable the work that the clinicians and the researchers are doing. We're not here to dictate how it's done. And that is really the central point in terms of how we have set up all of our structures, the mindset we take of being customer obsessed and saying, tell us what the problem is that you're trying to solve. We will be thought leaders and thought partners in helping advise you on how best to solve the problem. And then we're here to help you accelerate what you're trying to do and drive impact ultimately to our patients. That's what matters. Technology is a means to an end. It is not the end. And so I think taking that framing of patient impact, and two, research is important, but treating research separately from clinical care and operations is not the right mindset. And so we take that to heart in our work, is that it is at the table all the time. And how do we enable the work that we do? So hopefully that's helpful. Appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Shakib. Maybe stand here just for 2 seconds. As most of you can tell, I don't think I revealed this to you, right? But CPTN has been around since 2011, right? We have never had a chief information officer or, as part of these meetings. And this meeting is part of that experiment, recognizing that for us to achieve our mission, right? Today alone, right, we've had federal policy context from ONC, NCI, NIH, other partners. Yesterday, talks before you came were talking about gene regulatory network, single cell, drug discovery. I don't think any group ever brings, right, all the people that it takes to actually achieve the mission. So just to be transparent with you, this is an experiment that we as a community are trying to run because we actually need this context. I've been to one HIMSS meeting. None of the people here were at that HIMSS meeting, right? None of the people at the HIMSS meeting are ever at our meetings in this context. But I think everybody has communities, right? So one of our secrets to success is that in the pediatric context, it's small enough that we can communicate, right? So when we actually started working with Jay Jenkins, he said, oh, I know somebody at UCSF. I know somebody at Seattle. Like, let me call him up. So one of our asks, right, for both AWS and for you is, how do we take the kind of things that you've been able to help us do at CHOP and meet with your counterparts at other institutions to derive that innovative context? And I think you have really demonstrated amazing leadership at CHOP to make it possible for us in ways that, when you first came to CHOP, right, we took you out to dinner, I think, and just said, can we do this? It's been such an empowering context, but it's very heterogeneous, right, on our community, right? The people who are spending time figuring out which cell in this tumor is what cell type do not interact with you right, in that context. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face, and we need sort of a community-based approach. I think pediatrics has an opportunity to drive that innovation, and my hope is to really partner with you and the other institutions, right, to drive that enterprise to research partnership. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I first joined, Adam and I met in the first couple of weeks, and we were very like-minded in terms of where things need to go, and how do we partner to make that happen? And I think there's a couple of things in terms of, one of the things I think we absolutely need in this work is multidisciplinary teams, to your point. We are in our silos. We have to come together, so we're deploying fusion teams. How do we bring the informaticists together with the researcher, with the analyst, with the application folks, and really drive that forward? That's the model. It cannot be done in silos. I think the other component is, when I came from the adult space, when I look at adult, my thought is, and we've talked to AWS and others about this, is in pediatrics, how do we drive the same level of collaboration that some of these other folks are driving? For example, the Mayo Clinic platform, right? That is a destination in terms of data sharing and innovation, et cetera. We think that CHOP has a responsibility and ability to do some of that, but talking to others, and I spoke to a couple of folks recently. I know the CDIO at Seattle. I know the CDIO in all these other pediatric hospitals. How do we bring them together and say, look, this is really important. It's why we do the work. And how do we bring them in these conversations and say, how are you enabling this work? And let's compare notes. I mean, I think that's the next step in terms of where this needs to go.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Look at your crystal ball, and I'm curious, based on looking at this audience and all the different types of data that everybody's using, and looking at what you presented, do you think the EHR, regardless of what platform you're on, is going to go the route of being the portal for clinicians, or the EHR is going to go the route of becoming just another data set?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I'm looking for the crystal ball here, so it's got to be here somewhere. I think there's a couple. I think seeing the reports on the news, there's really only one EHR at this point for a large degree of folks. I think the question is, we view them. I think in the future, it is a data set and it's a portal, actually. So it is absolutely going to be a place where we get the majority of our clinical data in the traditional sense, but it is not the place that and it's extremely important, but it is one input into that. It does not have the imaging data. We talked about this earlier. It doesn't have the genomics data, and those are all coming from different sources. We need to bring all that together and integrate it. But in the data analytics world, we talk about this concept of conquering the last mile, which is whatever the decision support is, or the AI-based workflow is, it has to go back into the clinician's workflow, which happens to be your EMR. And so I think that's where the intersection happens. So I think it's both. I think it's a data set, a very important one, but just one of the sources. And the other aspect is that it's extremely integral to driving the end user adoption. And so whatever decision or recommendation we have needs to be fed back into the EMR.